Hello, lovelies. Today we are talking about ancient Egypt and consciousness, and mostly why you should care, because there is some quote-unquote wisdom floating around out there by one of today's quote-unquote greatest minds, who is part of the brain trust shaping humanity. And it scares the living daylights out of me. In episode 1, I talk about Hermes Trismegistus and how within the story of ancient Egypt, there may be a solution for us. In episode 2, we talked about how there is no history and how history is simply just a story that fits within a paradigm. Well, it will be no surprise then that within our current materialistic prison paradigm, history has taken a decidedly material tone. And in particular, we're going to look at the audacious work of the one Yuval Noah Harari, who has come to mass awareness because of a meme currently circulating that contains his infamous quote that man is a hackable animal and there is no God. Now, I'm not going to hold back here because the man simply angers me. In fact, I became aware of him one night when I was dead asleep and Chance was watching YouTubes. His ideas were such an affront to me that they reached into my sleeping brain and actually woke me up. I sat up in bed and said to Chance, "Who the fuck is this?" I was relieved to hear that he is one of the most influential thinkers on the planet, an advisor to our dear friend Klaus and the WEF, and that the world is eating up his stories like candy. Just great, isn't it? In Sapiens, published in 2011, and then in Homo Deus in 2015, Harari, an Israeli historian, takes the reader from the Big Bang to a fantastical, vaguely dystopian potential future for our species. The books have been monumentally successful. By 2018, Sapiens had been translated into nearly 50 languages and sold over 10 million copies worldwide, while Homo Deus has reached over 30 translations and several million copies. They are worth reading, not simply because they are a phenomenon, but because they turn on what seems to me to be a fundamental and ultimately rather problematic error about human beings and the creation in which we live. I'm going to read to you now from a fabulous article by a Nick Spencer from, of all places, the ABC. He says, "The first chapter of Sapiens opens with a clear statement that despite humans' long-favored view of ourselves, we are simply one of the many twigs on the Homo branch, one of many species that could have inherited the earth. It might have been Homo rudolfensis, or Homo erectus, or Homo neanderthalensis. I don't know how to say these. It happened to be us. We simply got lucky for no good reason. The contingency is essential to his argument. Humans are an animal of no consequence, as the title of his first chapter puts it. Up until very recently, in evolutionary terms, we were just another middle-of-the-road, middle-of-the-food chain species. It is doubtful whether Homo sapiens will still be around in 1,000 years from now. That being the case, it is pointless to waste time searching for purpose or meaning in our role, either individually or corporately. Evolution shuffled and dealt our species a good hand, or rather a good brain. We might as well make the most of it without looking for a reason. As far as we can tell," he puts it in Sapiens, "from a purely scientific viewpoint, human life has absolutely no meaning." Or, as he writes in Homo Deus, "To the best of our scientific understanding, the universe is a blind and purposeless process, full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing. How exactly a scientific viewpoint or understanding, whatever Harari actually means by that, could detect meaning and purpose, and what it would look like if it did, is far from clear. Asserting that there is no capital R reason why humans found themselves where we are, and no big historical, divine, or teleological reason explaining or predetermining our triumph, is not the same as saying there are no reasons. There certainly are. By Harari's reckoning, instead, it is the historian's job to root them out, and Harari roots out one big one. Human success rests on our imagination. As he puts it in Homo Deus, we use language to create. The word is significant. Meanings. And completely new realities. In this alone, we are unique. Thus, he writes in Sapiens, as far as we know, only sapiens can talk about entire kinds of entities that they have never seen, touched, or smelled. Thus, none of the things that humans have imagined over the centuries exist outside the stories that we invent and tell one another. There are no gods, no money, no human rights, and no laws beyond the common imagination of human beings. Much the same can be said of universal and immutable principles of justice, such as equality or hierarchy, which only exist in the fertile imagination of sapiens and in the myths they invent and tell one another. They are fictions, social constructs, or imagined realities, vital, significant, world-changing, but ultimately not in any way real. They exist, so to speak, only because they are useful. We believe in a particular order not because it's objectively true, but because believing it enables us to cooperate and forge a better society, which is a polite way of saying they don't exist. For Harari, only biology is real. Living things are real. Human organisms are real. But the stuff that comes out of our heads, like rights, liberty, and dignity, is not. So to me, this, albeit a currently popular way of thinking, is an incredibly dangerous way to think about us. In episode 2, I think, I took us through a journey where the perception of ancient Egypt, the views about it, changed throughout history and because of paradigm, in exactly the same way as the history and views about ancient Egypt have changed throughout the ages. It is clear that the opinions about humanity have also changed throughout the ages. Today, humans, in Harari's opinion, are useless animals and there is no God. But not that long ago, man was considered God. And to talk to you about that for a moment, there is no one better than Terence McKenna.
I mean, I've had an interest in Hermeticism and alchemy since I was about 14 and read Jung's Psychology and Alchemy. And it opened for me the fact of the existence of this vast literature, a literature that is very little read or understood in the modern context. I wouldn't hold a weekend like this simply to go over a body of ancient literature if I didn't think it had some efficacy or import for the modern dilemma. And some of you may know the song by the Grateful Dead, in which the refrain is, "We need a miracle every day." I think any reasonable person can conclude that the redemption of the world, if it's to be achieved, can only be achieved through magic. It's too late for science. It's too late for hortatory politics. When you look back into historical time, it's when you reach the 1st and 2nd centuries after Christ that you reach a world whose psychology was very much like the psychology of our own time. It was a psychology of despair and exhaustion. This is because Greek science, which had evolved under the aegis of Democritean atomism and Platonic metaphysics had essentially come to a dead end in those centuries. We can debate the reasons why this happened. An obvious suggestion would be that it was because they failed to develop an experimental method. And so everything just dissolved into competing schools of philosophical speculation. And a profound pessimism spread through the Hellenistic world. And out of that pessimism, and in the context of that kind of universal despair which attends the dissolution of great empires, a literature was created from the 1st to the 4th centuries after Christ, which we call the Hermetic corpus. What the Hermetic corpus is the most poetic and cleanly expressed outpouring of ancient knowledge that we possess, but it was reworked in the hands of these late Hellenistic peoples, and it is essentially a religion of the redemption of the earth through magic. It has great debt to a tradition called Sabian, which means to mean Manichaeanism. Mandaeanism. And Mandaeanism was a kind of proto-Hellenistic gnosis that laid great stress on the power of life, zoa, bios. And in that sense, it has a tremendously contemporary ring to it. We also are living in the twilight of a great empire. And I don't particularly mean the American empire. I mean the empire of European thinking created in the wake of the Protestant Reformation and the rise of modern industrialism. The empire, in short, of science. Science has exhausted itself and become mere techne. It's still able to perform its magical tricks, but it has no claim on a metaphysic with any meaning, because the program of rational understanding that was pursued by science has pushed so deeply into the phenomenon of nature that the internal contradictions of the method are now exposed for all to see. Well, we have unconsciously imbibed the ontology of science, where we have mind firmly separated out from the world. We take this for granted. It's effortless because it's the ambiance of the civilization that we've been born into. But in an earlier age, and some writers would say a more naive age, but I wonder about that. But in an earlier age, mind and matter were seen to be alloyed together throughout nature. The myth of our society is the existential myth, that we are cast into matter, that we are lost in a universe that has no meaning for us, that we must make our meaning. This is what Sartre and Kierkegaard, all those people are saying, that we must make our meaning. It reaches its most absurd expression in Sartre's statement that nature is mute. I mean, this is as far from alchemical thinking as you can possibly get. Because for the alchemist, nature was a great book, an open book to be read by putting nature through processes which revealed not only its inner mechanics, but the inner mechanics of the artifacts, the person working upon the material. In other words, the alchemist. The two distinguishing factors, at least that stand out for me, that I think you need to incorporate into your thinking about the Hermeticism. The first is the divinity of human beings, an extraordinarily radical idea in the context of late Hellenistic thinking. We all operate under the spell of the concept of the fall of man, that man is an inferior being, errors were made in the Garden of Eden, and that we are far, far from the nature of divinity. All magic, and all magic in the West is derivative from this tradition, takes the position that man is a divine being. Men and women are divine beings. The Corpus Hermeticum actually refers to man as God's brother. And this is a double-edged perception. It gives tremendous dignity to the human enterprise, but it also raises the possibility of the error of pride and hubris. In the Renaissance, Marcello Ficino boiled this notion down to the aphorism, man is the measure of all things. And you may notice that this is the position really of science, that man is the measure of all things, that it is up to us. We can decide the course of the cosmos. All magic stems from this position. This is why the church was so concerned to stamp out magic, because it assigns man an importance that the church would rather reserve to deity. So that's the first great division between Christian thinking and Hermetic thinking, an entirely different conception of what human beings are. And notice that this position on man empowers tremendous freedom. Man is the measure of all things. The second distinguishing factor in Hermeticism is the belief that we can control fate, that we can escape from cosmic fate. The late Hellenistic mindset was, and what you get in the Gnostics is the belief that because of astrology, because of the stars, we are subject to control from these exterior forces. In most Gnostic thinking, the whole concern is to somehow evade what is called the hymarmony, cosmic fate. And in the Gnostic systems, the only way it can be done is by ascending through the shells of cosmic ordering forces, the archons, the planets, the planetary demons, so forth and so on. And then beyond the hymarmony, which is actually thought of as a place in space that you burst through, you transcend fate. What the Hermetic thought is that these fates become personified as the decans, as the stellar demons. And then it is held that there is a magical system which is possible where you can call these archangels to your side and work with them and not be subject to the inevitable working of the cosmic machinery. And this burst like a revelation over the late Hellenistic world, because there was such philosophical and emotional and political exhaustion that this is a counterpoise to the message of the New Testament, which is a similar message, that you can be saved in the body, that you can escape the inevitable dissolution and degradation laid upon us by time. So these are the two distinguishing factors, the divinity of man and the possibility of using magic to evade the machinery of fate.
Okay, well, that was a little bit longer than it needed to be, but how amazing is Terence McKenna? And I want to point out here the cyclical nature of time. Everything old is new again. And I must admit, I know which of these two I prefer. But what about you? Are we gods or are we hackable animals? Okay, maybe gods is a bit hard to swallow, I'll admit that. So how about immortal beings in a human skin? Or what about gods in process? I think that's probably the most likely. But what if instead of the idea of God, we use the idea of holistic? Rudolf Steiner, as you know, is my favorite right now. And he talks about a time when humans could see spirit, could see the spirit of all things. They could tell the nature of a stone 50 feet from here just by looking at it. Not just the type of stone or its chemical compounds, but so much more. Its spirit. Now, look, maybe that manifested its magnetic properties, and with that knowledge, they could see with spirit eyes how to affect it in order to perhaps make it lighter, change the magnetism. I don't know. This is all speculation. But what if it were possible? Steiner does describe how the alchemists of old, in describing sulfur and cinnabar, seemed to be more poetic, more imaginative, more detailed in their descriptions of these substances. And it's his contention that that was not mere romanticism, but spiritual sight. They were trying to convey what they could see with spiritual eyes beyond the mere material substance. Now, I know trying to describe the spiritual nature of sulfur would be like trying to explain an orgasm to someone who has not had one. You would be met with a barrage of words of how ridiculous all that sounds. That simply by rubbing an appendage your head explodes. Pure fantasy, young man. But this is very much the world in which we live, and I'm sure my next story will have the very same effect on you. I, as you know, am 56 years old, and I have been working on myself for I don't even know how long, and lately things haven't been going that well. And I realized that I was having abandonment issues. And it was pretty obvious because my mother died when I was 16. I had done all kinds of work on this, and I just could not clear it. At the time, I was also aware that my mother's mother had died when she was 16. And so I thought perhaps the reason that I cannot clear this is that this is my mother's abandonment issue, and that we both need to work on it together. In fact, that whole line was kind of interesting because my mother's mother died, my grandfather was orphaned, so there was a lot of potential abandonment in that side of the family, in my maternal line. So I went inside and I requested the presence of my mother and my grandmother. And I started talking to them about abandonment issues. And guess what happened? My Nana showed up out of the blue. It hadn't even occurred to me, even though I consciously was aware of the fact that my Nana, my father's mother, had been abandoned. She was actually an orphan, and she was left on the doorstep as a very young child, sold into servitude, and only came out of it because she got married as a young woman. She then lived a life with my dad and my mum and my brother out the back in a nanny flat. And we were a very, very happy family for a very, very long time. But then my mother died and my father got messed up. And he took me overseas to live in America. So effectively, my father, who was the apple of her eye, and me, also an apple of her eye, abandoned her and left her to die alone in a nursing home. Now, if you had asked me, and even if I had asked myself who had been abandoned in my family, it was not my Nana. My Nana was not at all the person that I thought of. I hadn't even thought about the other side of the family. And so in that moment when my deceased Nana showed up and explained to me how she had been abandoned, I knew this was real, and I knew it was not my imagination. You always know it's real when it's not something that you think is going to happen. And I was able finally to heal that wound, and cymatically, my life rearranged, which is what happens when you heal these wounds. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small, but there was a shift, a dramatic shift, and it felt like 50 pounds of weight had dropped off my shoulders. Now, a pure materialist would say I'm insane, that it's all my imagination. But a pure materialist is not inside my body, thankfully. And let me tell you this. While all this was going on, Will Smith got whacked on stage. And I didn't spend 1 minute thinking about it. I have not spent 1 minute thinking about fucking Will Smith. But so many people did. A person they don't even know in reality. A person that everybody seems to have opinions about. A person that couldn't possibly be acting because he's such a good actor. I mean, I don't even know some of these things that I've heard are just literally blowing my mind. Why are we so easily swayed by the wind? We go from outrage about people making decisions about their health, their own health, to outrage about a guy invading a country we've never been to or don't know anybody in, then to outrage by a movie star whacking another movie star on some pointless television show to begin with. Why do we care? Perhaps that's why Harari thinks we're hackable animals, because the powers that be put a story in front of our face and we get so outraged. We have so many opinions about a guy we don't even know and who won't impact our life at all. But were any of these our own ideas? Would we have given them even a moment's thought had they not been hacked into our consciousness? And when you think about it, right, when you think about it really, 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 I just had a more profound life-changing experience with a dead relative, healing my life in a way that has made profound changes in my life. Can anybody say that their anger about Will Smith has done the same for them? So I guess it comes back to this. Are we hackable animals and useless eaters? Or are we gods in process, holistic beings that can live both in the material and the spiritual world? And really, why is this even important, right? Okay, why is it important? Well, the answer to this question dictates both individual and group beliefs concerning reality, society, and culture. Such beliefs, in turn, both encourage and constrain behavior, what is allowed and what is not allowed. If we are hackable animals, and it appears that the powers believe we are, then we are nothing but useless eaters, ripe for microchipping, tracking, controlling, and culling as they see fit. But ultimately it comes down to each one of us. If you regard your incarnated material physical life as the complete extent of your existence, you'll tend to conduct yourself much differently than an immortal, holistic, God in process. One thing I can tell you is that the greats throughout history, Socrates, Giordano Bruno, Thomas More, Martin Luther King, are not remembered because they were hackable animals. Perhaps it's time to remember who we are. Thank you for listening, lovelies. And if you like this podcast and would like to support us, please go to magicalegypt.com, and I have made a special discount coupon just for you all. And the coupon code is LOVE. And that will get you $30 off any Magical Egypt purchase. Also, I've started Patreon, so you can mosey on over there and see if you want to contribute. But I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate all your support, and more soon.